Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Don't Panic: Teaching and Leading in Education in the World of Generative AI. My name is Jason Neiffer, and I'm the Executive Director of the Montana Digital Academy. And thanks to Jenny for inviting me for today's webinar. I'm joining you from the beautiful Montana Digital Academy offices at the University of Montana in Missoula, Montana today. I'm really excited to get to spend the hour with you on this incredibly important and emerging topic. First and foremost, let me say that I will be citing some web pages today and also some studies and other in-depth looks at generative AI. And I want to tell you that every link I'm sharing today, along with all the slides that I'm using today, is available in a wakelet at mtda.link/April AI Wakelet. And I'll pause on this for just a moment so you can write that address down. But again, this will have all the information that you need. Everything I refer to today will be listed there in that wakelet. And if I miss anything, feel free to email me and I'll share my email address at the end. And I'd be happy to add it there or share that with you directly. It's important to me that we start this conversation right now for a variety of reasons. But before we jump into that, I do have a bit of an interactive component that I'd like to start with you today. And I'm going to use a Jamboard for this. And the way you get to that Jamboard is by going to this link, mtda.link/AI Jamboard. And I'll leave that up for a moment. Again, mtda.link/AI Jamboard, and I will jump into the Jamboard itself. And once we get a couple of folks there, I have a couple of questions to start off with to kind of get to know where you're at on this topic. And at the end of our time today, I'll give you an opportunity to share some reflections about where you might see this technology going next in context of K-12 education. I see that Mike has joined, and perhaps we have shy folks today. And again, not required, but certainly an element of interactivity. There we go. Now I know we have an audience because an anonymous rabbit has joined. So I just have a couple quick questions to get a sense of maybe where you're at. And if you haven't used Jamboard before, it's a really great tool for providing interactivity, even if you have a distance. They do have a cool and expensive Jamboard hardware that you can buy from Google to put this up on a large screen. And also this tool looks great on a large screen. But the MTDA staff in particular likes to use Jamboard when we're trying to create kind of a whiteboard experience with people at a distance. So starting off today, my question for you is, before signing up for today's webinar, how much have you read, watched, or heard about generative AI? And the way you will respond is just to grab a pen. In this case, you can choose different thickness of pens and also different colors. I'm going to grab this green because it looks nice. And then all you need to do is go over here and put a check. So I'm uttered quite a bit, but why don't you share with me how much you've heard about or read about or watched about generative AI to this point. And we've got an some, another some, quite a bit. Using appropriate teacher wait time. And then one other quick question before we jump into today's topic, to get a sense of who our audience is today. If you could share with me how much of you actually used generative AI. And again, the scale here, none or almost none. Another I've played with it and quite a bit. And the way you switch pages on Jamboard is there are arrows on top of the page that will take you to our different slides. So if you go to slide 2 and share with me how much you've actually used generative AI tools, any of the generative AI tools. I see a question in chat. mtda.link/AI Jamboard is where you're going to get this. Okay, so I see that we have a lot of folks in here that have experienced these tools before. I'm gonna try to balance the, you've never seen it before versus you've seen quite a bit of the tools before, and intersperse it with some thoughts I have in regards to where we might go next with these technologies. And again, we'll come back to this at the end of our presentation today to share some thoughts and feedback. So before we get into the primary presentation, I want to start off with a little bit of context about what AI, generative AI is, and what it means in context of education. First and foremost, even though we refer to things generically as AI is not a new term, and in fact, it goes back nearly 60 years that artificial intelligence has been both a dream of scientists, also the fodder of science fiction, and certainly where most people assumed computers and broader technology was going. But the notion of generative AI, which is really the topic of conversation right now broadly, not only in K-12 education, but also the world, is a relatively new phenomenon. Generative AI has some history going back about 25 years, going back to the very beginning of the internet. But really, AI and generative AI has been on the radar for education for 10 or 15 years, but as a future looking phenomenon or a future looking something to look forward to, or perhaps maybe something to fear. And really, this came to a head in November 2022 when OpenAI, which is a large AI company of billions of dollars of net worth, released something called ChatGPT version 3.5. And ChatGPT has been around for several years. And in fact, I took a look at betas of version 1 and version 2. They were really interesting because they were considered to be conversational AI, which means you could go back and forth with the tool in the style of a conversation. And again, I'll show that in more detail in a moment. But from the standpoint of what you need to know about generative AI, basically generative AI is, and I like this definition from George Lawton, this is also in the Wakelet, is a type of artificial intelligence technology that can produce various types of content, including text, imagery, audio, and synthetic data. The recent buzz around generative AI has been driven around the simplicity of new interfaces for creating high quality text, graphics, and video in a matter of seconds. And so when we're talking about artificial intelligence right now, chances are we're talking about generative AI, which is a series of tools that allow you to ask questions or interact with a chatbot or an input prompt in order to create something. 5 years ago, this was mostly text chat back and forth, and so you could ask questions or ask a chat bot or a generative AI model to create something for you. And in the last few years, this has expanded dramatically to include the production of everything from simple images to video. And in fact, there are experiments on the internet right now. In fact, you can look up this one if you're interested in seeing something kind of bizarre and interesting. There is a Twitch channel. Twitch is generally a gamer platform for broadcasting when you're playing video games, but there's a 24/7 Twitch channel dedicated to auto-generated Seinfeld episodes. So in other words, they take the collection of everything we know about the Seinfeld show, they create admittedly rudimentary video. That video is centered on kind of blocky images, almost like a 1980s or 90s video game, and then just generates on the fly episodes from scratch. And sometimes they're funny and sometimes they're kind of bizarre. But then again, that was the Seinfeld show in the 1990s. But that's the direction we're going into from the standpoint of being able to generate a lot of imagery, a lot of text, a lot of music, a lot of video with relatively little input from you, the end user. And for those of you that haven't seen ChatGPT before, it's a really simple interface. It's essentially a chat back and forth. This is a very simple example, and again, I'll do a live demonstration in a moment. I asked ChatGPT 3.5 to write a 500-word article on the War of 1812 from the British perspective, and it was able to create something for me. And my background is teaching history, so it was relatively accurate in what it created. But you can ask ChatGPT and its derivatives really about anything, and usually get an answer that seems like it's at least of good basic quality, if not a lot more deep in the way it was created or presented. There are literally thousands of tools being released every single month. I'm going to share with you one of the places I go to look at this. Futurepedia.io is, generally speaking, considered to be one of the better directories of AI tools. The reason why I mention this to you is because there are literally dozens, maybe hundreds of new tools being released each day. And I guarantee you, and I'll tell you this very much from my perspective, that the likelihood of most of these tools surviving or sticking around more than a couple months and couple of years is almost nil. It is the early days in generative AI tools. And I think that's something to be thoughtful about, and also remember that these tools are definitely changing and coming near you. I would also note that there is an extraordinary amount of competition going on here, and all the major players are doing some kind of AI play. OpenAI, with its ChatGPT tool and its associated tools for generating images, is perhaps the best known right now because of the splash it made in November when it released its new ChatGPT 3.5. But Google has a play in this area that's known as Google Bard, which I'm going to show you here in a moment. Microsoft is integrating ChatGPT into its search engine and eventually across its Office suite. Google is doing the same thing as well. And I read an article the other day saying that it's very quiet, but Amazon is also releasing I'm not releasing, but creating a series of generative AI tools as well. And what's interesting about that is you don't hear about it, and yet Amazon has more employees and more research time dedicated than Microsoft does, which is arguably one of the leaders right now in this space. So this is absolutely 100% coming to a computer or an interface, or certainly a web browser near you. So for a moment, I just want to give a very brief demonstration to give you a sense of what these tools look like. And these are the very basic tools I'm going to start with. This is not some of the really extraordinary specific tools. And I'm going to show you a couple examples of that in a moment. But if you ever had an opportunity, or hadn't had an opportunity yet to play around with ChatGPT, this is really as simple as the interface looks like. And you can ask it questions very broadly or very specifically. And certainly it acts like a search engine, although I'll have some comments about that in a moment. Tell me more about the president of Carter. So referring to Jimmy Carter. And of course, it is saying something went wrong. So we're going to refresh. Do it live, they say. There we go. Tell me more about the Jimmy Carter. And ChatGPT has the ability to come up with text. Now, one thing that's really important to remember, this is not information that comes from a source. And in fact, this is generated information. And the reason why this is the case is because all these tools refer to something as a large language model, or an LLM. So when ChatGPT is coming up with this text, it's not looking out to the internet and saying, great, show me 3 articles about Jimmy Carter, and then constructing this. It's literally taking its training data. So in other words, all the websites it was trained off of, and it's coming up with text based on its predictions of what answers your question. That's a very different phenomenon than being able to go to a search engine, because in a lot of ways, it's using similar processes that you might come up with if you were asked to talk a little bit about Jimmy Carter and some basics about his presidency. What's interesting about almost all of these processes is that you can start to get a little more detail than what you're asking for to come up with some really stunning results. So for example, tell me more about Carter's time in office from 4 different political perspectives. So now what I've asked it to do is tell me about Jimmy Carter, but don't just give me basic facts. Tell me about from different political perspectives. So it's going to write from a liberal perspective, and it's going to write from a conservative perspective. And it's also going to look at a libertarian perspective and a socialist perspective. And again, you start to see really quickly how these language models could be very interesting in generating text. But remember, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, ChatGPT and its derivatives is not a search engine. And here's one of the ways you know that. Tell me about Jason Neiffer. Okay. Now I'm not expecting to get anything here because I'm not. Well, I guess I am going to get something here. Because I am not. Um, that popularly known, but it's create a little biography for me here. But here's one of my favorite things to do is check ChatGPT. And since I know a lot about Jason Neiffer, I'm able to do that pretty easily. I'm an educator, technologist, and author, not really an author, based in Montana. He's currently the director of technology innovation at Montana Digital Academy, not a title we've ever used, a state-funded online school, and also an adjunct professor at the University of Montana, kind of legit. Neiffer's written and presented extensively on topics related to technology, or education, innovation. Actually more accurate than I assumed. But here's where it gets interesting. He's a frequent speaker at technology conferences, has been quoted in numerous publications, including the New York Times and CNN. That's not true. I've never been quoted in either publication. I'm also not the author, co-author of the Chromebook class, which provides guidance on how to use Google Chrome laptops in educational settings, although that's part of my expertise. And once you start digging a little bit in on tools like this, it feels like a search engine, but it's really not, because it's generating these paragraphs from scratch. If I go to try to search for one of these on Google, I'm not going to be able to find it because this text is not copied from elsewhere. It's generated from scratch. And in fact, one of the ways you know that is you can ask it to generate additional responses. If I don't like that, I can now click it to generate it again, and it's going to now rewrite my biography for that purposes. And it looks like it's still giving me the not correct title. It has pulled my supposed book and citations at CNN and the New York Times, and I'm also not a member of the Association for Educational Communication and Technology. In fact, I don't even know that organization very well. So you start to see that almost immediately there's an extraordinary amount of interesting things that are happening here, right? But it's much different than any other set of tools we have in the past because it's not a search engine. I would also note, just to give you a couple of other quick examples of broad tools, there's a really wonderful tool called Midjourney. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of AI-based image generation tools, but by far my favorite is Midjourney. It costs money. In fact, they had a free tier, but so many people were generating images that were used for shenanigans. They now want people to pay for it so they can trace images back to people causing shenanigans. And the interface is completely wonky. But when you get a sense um, of the powerfulness of the tool, it's really quite extraordinary. So I'm going to go into Discord. Discord is a chat platform. It's actually made the news recently because it was a part of the storyline on the recent document link and the person arrested for that last week. But you can essentially ask Midjourney to generate images for you based on a prompt. And again, the interface is a little wonky, but I'm going to say imagine is the way I get to do things. And let's say I was teaching a lesson on Thomas Jefferson and his theory about the separation of church and state. So I want an image of Thomas Jefferson, but I want to kind of give it a religious vibe to it. In order to maybe create a cover or a first slide in a presentation. So I want an image of Thomas Jefferson in a church style stained glass window. And I would like that to be in the 16:9 aspect ratio so I can use it in a slide. Now, this usually takes a little bit of time, so I might actually put a couple prompts here and come back to this. I'm also going to imagine Missoula, Montana in the winter time. And you can see in the background now, it's starting to generate images for me to work with. And it did exactly what I asked it to. There's 4 images of Thomas Jefferson, and still working. We're not quite there yet. 4 images of Thomas Jefferson in the style of a stained glass window. And you see it's already working on my Missoula, Montana in the wintertime as well. And as far as your imagination, you can usually get Midjourney to create a pretty great image for you. There we go. In fact, I love those. And I can ask it to do variations on that if I want to. So let's say number 3 is my best one. So I'd like variations on number 3. Here's Missoula. We're not quite there yet, although we're close. Those all kind of look like Missoula, Montana in the wintertime. So I want to ask for variations on number 4. And you'll notice in the background, it's also been creating variations on my stained glass window featuring Thomas Jefferson. And once it creates images and I'm happy with one of them, I can ask it to upscale the image. So in other words, make it of higher quality so I can use it in different ways. So I will upscale image number 4 here. I can simply download it and use it. And again, your imagination is the limit here, because it's utilizing all the information it knows, all the information that's been trained on. The newest version of ChatGPT is version 4, and there are rumors that it was trained by trillions of pieces of information, which include both images and text. And that's why it knows who Thomas Jefferson is. And that's why it knows what a stained glass window looks like. And it's not copying this from the internet, it's generating it based on training data from the internet. I want to give you one last very general idea. This is an example of a tool that is exactly what's being generated right now by hundreds, if not dozens. I'm sorry, if not hundreds and thousands of companies right now, taking all the various large language learning models, including ChatGPT is the primary one, or the OpenAI is the primary one. But this is a tool called Lex. And what I've done here is I've taken 4 paragraphs out of my doctoral dissertation. This is an early draft of my doctoral dissertation. And Lex is really well known because it has a means of either taking your text and coming up with clever titles. Think about like if you're writing a blog, or if you are stuck and you have writer's block and you're writing along and you'd like help from ChatGPT, which is what backs the Lex model. All you have to do is type 3 pluses, and ChatGPT will start to generate text based on what you've already written. So in other words, the idea here is it helps get rid of writer's block. Now, one thing to keep in mind here, you'll notice it cited cited sources, and you might think to yourself, awesome, right? This tool is actually citing sources for me. But in general, with most of these tools, the sources aren't legitimate. They're not even real. They just look like source citations. Whether Gibson and Infother in 2017 is real or not is highly unlikely, and certainly everyone I've looked up that's been produced by Lex is not. The same is true of Jackson, Adams, Baker, Estrada, and Freeman in 2015, because it's not researching this information. It's just trying to generate based on the information it's been trained on. So it looks like a legitimate source site, but it's not a source site in itself. So that's a very basic demo of what it looks like. And especially if you're new to these tools today, it probably doesn't take much of a stretch of the imagination to say that this causes what I would say is an extraordinary shift in the way we might use computers and technology, not just to generate, not just to create, not just to interact, but also to learn. So what I want to talk about for a couple of moments is how this kind of mind-blowing nature could lead us to maybe making poor decisions. And in fact, I think so far, we've oftentimes been a little too quick to hit the panic button as opposed to really thinking about good ways that we can be proactive at finding good, interesting ways to utilize these tools, both as professionals and also with our students. And I would advise you, it's really easy to want to hit the panic button right now because of the extraordinary forces that generative AI is likely to unleash on K-12 education. But before we jump into that, I want to give you some advice of what I think are the wrong ways that we should be moving forward with this technology. First and foremost, I've heard this a couple of different times, both from colleagues inside the state and colleagues outside the state, that some folks have said that the easy way for education to deal with ChatGPT is to ban typed work in a classroom. What's interesting about that to me is a couple of pieces. The first one is that if you looked at the handwriting of a K-12 student lately, it's absolutely atrocious. And my guess is that it wouldn't take long for us to lose our patience with that. Second, these tools are going to be available whether we give them access to them directly in schools or not. And I'll talk about the complications of that a little bit later. But it's not like students can't just copy it onto a piece of paper. But also, the bottom line is that these tools are going to be a part of our students' future, whether we like it or not. And I'll talk about that in more detail in a moment. But I think we need to be very cautious before trying to find ways to cleverly outthink our students. And in fact, one of the ways I know that, and I love this article from PC Gamer in February, a student actually used AI and a 3D printer to create what is called an auto pen. It's a machine that you can utilize to essentially take a real pen and write on real paper. But he used a Raspberry Pi, so a cheap computer, and a cheap 3D printer to essentially create a bot that would write with in his handwriting whatever he generated with AI. I'm not saying that this is the risk or that all of our students are going to immediately find ways to go about this process, but please understand we can't create an arms race with our students. That's not a winning strategy for us to be able to figure out the way to use AI in a classroom. And the bottom line is that thinking and learning or teaching and learning needs to evolve with this. If for no other reason, then we can't spend all of our time trying to outsmart our students who may want to use AI in the service of learning or perhaps not learning, as the case may be. The second thing that I think we need to be very cautious about is assuming that this is a fad. And I will tell you, I am extremely cautious of anybody that says that this tool will change everything. In fact, I've spent most of the last 25 years in education talking about how I'm pretty ho-hum about whether X, Y, and Z is going to change education. Because in a lot of ways, the mass evolution of technology, even in the last 15 years, hasn't done all that much to change things about education. And I include my own day job about online learning in this, that a lot of people said that online learning access will change everything. And in a lot of ways, it really hasn't. But I will tell you right now that with the sole exception of the internet, I have never seen a tool like this that is likely to create a really massive shift in the way we want to think about thinking and learning. And I think in a lot of ways, it can do us a lot of good in helping students become more powerful, become better learners, become better thinkers, become better participants in a democracy, but only if we embrace these technologies. I really think that you can't uninvent generative AI tools. And in fact, even well-meaning scholars that have asked for generative AI tool companies to pause just so we can think about the ethical implications of this have fallen largely on deaf ears. And if we don't think about generative AI in context of how we might embrace it in K-12 education, I feel that others will make this decision for us, mostly to a negative or disadvantage to the concept of teaching and learning. And let's remember that a lot of people thought the internet itself was just a passing fad. And I love this article. It's from an old Denver newspaper talking about how people are leaving the internet in droves. And to be honest, having been an internet user in December of 2000, the slowness of the internet might have paused my use of it. It probably did a lot more before the wide availability of broadband. But the bottom line is that it wasn't a fad. I also think this isn't a fad either. And in fact, many of the innovations that have become part of the internet, whether it's mobile computing or the extraordinary amount of data that we share with third-party tools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. None of these are fads and continue to become pretty important parts of our daily lives. I would also caution that we do not overly rely on kids to teach us about AI. And I will tell you that one of the biggest mistakes I think we've made in public education in the last 25 years is adopting frameworks to suggest that students somehow should be directing where we go with technology in the classroom. A lot of that comes from this concept. This is an article from 2001 from Mark Prinsky, who is a prominent theorist and scholar in educational technology. And he wrote this article that you've probably heard referred to, whether you knew it was from Prinsky or not, about the notion of digital natives and digital immigrants. And this framework says that students think differently about technology because they grew up in technology, and adults, especially us older adults, really are incapable of understanding the way students think and learn, because of their ability to grow up in a technologically dominated age. I'm not saying that Mr. Prinsky's completely wrong, although the research has really turned on Prinsky's work in the last 15 years. If you need any evidence of that, run a help desk for a couple of days for students, and you'll know that, especially pre-pandemic, many students didn't have very foundational skills to be productive and learn with technology. Because they like using technology is not the same as being able to learn with it. And I fear that if we don't take on a proactive approach to AI, that we may be stuck in a mode where we'll just let our students teach us about it, and then the same thing happens that happened with social media, where in absence of educator voice, an absence of school voice, an absence of mature and experienced and wise voices, the technologies were used in a way to divide us as opposed to unite us, or make us less cognizant about reality as opposed to more. And I would also say that this is not something we're going to be able to ban our way out of. And I have to say, I understand why a lot of districts have chosen to ban this technology as opposed to do something with it, in part because it's happened so quickly with so little in the way of real discussion in K-12 education, in faculty meetings, in the teachers' lounge, that it's probably safer to try to ban first. But bans must absolutely come with conversation about how we're both going to use these technologies, and also how we can help our students to use these technologies correctly, safely, with privacy in mind, and all the ways that we need them to use them that our wisdom can bring to them. Students are going to come to us with, well, I should say, most students are going to come to us with good ideas about how to use these technologies in a way to help their learning. A lot of them are going to do what is a very age appropriate way to think about, which is to take shortcuts. And I don't think banning is the right way to go about this at all. I also would note that these technologies will have extraordinary impact on our students, whether we understand that or not. I think the question is of time. This is a March 2023 study released by folks that work for ChatGPT and OpenAI, and also researchers at the University of Pennsylvania. And this is an example of categories of jobs that are likely to be significantly impacted by generative AI technology. And they go by an exposure percentage. So the higher the percentage, the more likely it is that your job will be impacted by generative AI. But it's not a real shock that interpreters, translators, poets, creative writers, public relations specialists will be impacted by this. I don't really understand animal scientists in this context, but it's listed there as well. Survey researchers and writers and authors, mathematicians, financial quantitative analysts, web and design interface people, correspondence clerks, blockchain engineers, proofreaders, and copy markers, all impacted significantly by these technologies. And by the way, I don't have the study here today, but if you're thinking education might be impacted by this, that's not where the data is suggesting. In fact, if anything, generative AI might create more need for education, but that's the context of another webinar. And before you dismiss this technology as saying, well, it can't do what I do, or can't teach what I teach, or can't understand what I do, this chart blew me away in that notion. This is from the most recent release of ChatGPT, ChatGPT 4. It's only available right now to those that pay for the tool, which I do. But ChatGPT 3.5, which is the 2022 version of this tool, was given several tests, including AP tests, bar exams, GRE exams, all sorts of typical exams that you might take in order to show your knowledge or show your cognizance of something. And the version 3.5 was pretty disappointing. Scored the lowest on the AP Calculus BC test, so didn't pass at all. It did nail the AP Art History exam in all three places, but it couldn't pass the AP Macroeconomics test. It couldn't pass the AP Chemistry test. It was only the 10th percentile in a uniform bar exam. It was only in the 40th percentile of the LSAT. And then the Chat GPT, and then it gave it extra power. Is that what it means by having no vision? Is that it couldn't take a look at it itself, as opposed to having it fed into it. But note all the scores on the left-hand side. Extraordinary amounts of ability to be able to do that. And this is the reason why I think we need to take this tool seriously. Not that I think that students should be taking assessments or plugging in ChatGPT because of these assessments, but because this tool is going to become so powerful that if we don't start to think about it in context of our workflow, then I think it's going to happen for us, right? So the other two things I want to talk about, and then we'll open up to a little back and forth on the Jamboard, and then I'm happy to take any questions you might have. First and foremost, when it comes to you as a teacher, I think generative AI has the ability to do something that has not been a part of really any educational reform for the past 50 years, which is to give you time. I have never seen a tool, including the internet, the rise of Web 2.0 tools, mobile computing, widespread broadband access. I haven't seen any tool that has the potential that I think generative AI has to give you back your time. And with all the extraordinary demands on especially in the K-12 environment, especially in the last 5 years, especially with the pandemic era, I think that this has the ability to give you a set of tools that give you superpowers for the purpose of bringing back some sanity and some balance into a K-12 educator's life. And so I'm going to go back to ChatGPT for a second and just show you how stupid simple just this interface. And I'm talking about the tools we're building on top of it. I'm talking about just this interface. I do this demo quite often, but I'm looking for rubrics, right? And so I type rubrics into Google. I found some essay rubrics, and you've probably done this before too. And actually, the document I'm looking for is a little messier than this. So I'm going to say I want a rubric in a PDF. And so here we go. Here's a rubric for an essay in high school. So you'll notice here there is 5 criteria, and there's scores from 1 to 4. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to copy and paste this into ChatGPT. And I'm going to show you how I'm going to play this out. Hey, ChatGPT, I need your help. I have to grade a lot of essays. And in fact, I'm going to use the newest version of this. I have to grade a lot of essays, and I'd like you to evaluate each essay I share with you based on the following rubric. If you understand, say you understand what I am asking. Now I'm going to say, here is the rubric. I don't even bother to correct the spellings or anything anymore. So now, you know, what I just did is kind of silly, right? I copy and pasted something from a PDF, right? Which is where information goes to die. Hard to get information out of. And I just pasted in here and said, help me based on this rubric. And of course, something went wrong. Heyo. Do it live, they say. Okay, we're gonna try that again. I'll take my name out of it. Okay. And it's gonna say, I understand what you're asking. You would like me to evaluate essays based on the rubric provided, which consists of the following categories. And there we go. Okay, so there's a really great exemplar essay document at Turnitin, which I think is actually kind of ironic. That's where it's at. And so I'm just going to go find a mistakes were made. I want something that's proficient. And I'm just going to, again, kind of copy and dirty paste this into ChatGPT. And it's now giving me comments based on the specific rubric. And it's this kind of stuff that I think really blows me away with that. And the more detailed you make your your ask, the more likely it is you could ask it to assign specific scores with justification. You could ask it to provide 3 comments. And in fact, I'm going to do that right now. Please make a list of 5 specific things the student can improve. And it's this kind of stuff that I think is really mind blowing in order to help really save time for you. The bottom line is that I'm not even sure if I would use this tool necessarily to grade in this way. But imagine for a moment, instead of relying on a peer review, you could have a student start off with um, using a chat model to be able to evaluate it based on your standards. Or if you're looking for something very specific, like for example, the use of punctuation, having a student copy and paste their draft of an essay into a generative AI rubric and then asking it to do interesting things with that. And this doesn't even turn into like what the enormous amount of tools are being built on top of it. And I guess I would tell you one more time that these tools aren't going to last very long. Questionwell.org is an example of one of these tools. I've been playing around with it based on a reference I saw on Twitter the other day to it. I've signed in, but this one allows you to essentially generate unlimited number of questions, like multiple choice style questions based on a text. So I actually have a go-to text I like to put inside of here. I'm going to say World War I and its aftermath, and I'm going to take this prelude to war text. I'm going to say World War I causes. I'm going to paste this text into here, and now it's going to generate questions for me. And again, relatively low level multiple choice questions, but this is the kind of tools that people are building on top of ChatGPT. And again, this is the worst these tools will ever be, right? These are happening quickly. They're evolving quite fast. And imagine what these tools will look like in 6 months or a year or 2 years when more teachers have the opportunity to work with groups putting up these tools for the purpose of creating new pieces. While that's processing in the background, I'm going to take that same text and do something kind of interesting. What I copy and pasted from was a college level textbook. So imagine for a moment you have a student at a 7th or 8th grade reading level, and you want to write something at a different reading level. Well, ChatGPT is great at that. Hey, ChatGPT, again, I'm always nice to it in case later we get the singularity. Can you rewrite this for an 8th grade reading level? And now it has shortened the text and rewritten it for an 8th grade reading level. And I don't think it takes a lot of imagination to think about what that might look like in context. And that's still going in the background, although now that's paused, I fear it might have stalled out on us. But to give you another example of a tool that's emerging, this is called Education Copilot, and it's actually a pretty extraordinary set of tools that you can utilize. That they're going to create several Copilot-like tools for you. But to give you an idea behind this, it has a unit planner, right? So I'm going to say Russian geography. And I want this to be a social, no, I want it to be a geography course. The unit should cover physical geography and political geography and a brief history, location of important places. And I'm not going to put any standards or objectives, although it will write them for me if I want to. Now I'm going to go to the final step. I would like to create a lesson of 10 units. And now in the background, it's just going to start generating student materials, objectives for me based on that. And hey, look what happened in the background. We now have 21 questions that are generated. It not only has written those questions, and I can put those into a learning management system. I can put those into a Word document. You'll also notice it has created a learning objective or set of learning objectives based on this as well, and it created those objectives based on my text. So again, early days in these tools, but it doesn't take a lot of imagination to think about what the next part of this might look like based on that. And for me, I think there's three broad three broad categories of ways that I think that generative AI might help a teacher. Certainly, content creation, which is mostly what I just generated, is extraordinary, right? Imagine for a moment coming up with case studies for students to evaluate, or a text on something that none of your formal textbooks provide. And again, you need some expertise to make sure that the generative AI isn't fibbing to you, right? And that's something we'll talk about in greater detail in a moment. But the ability to create any kind of content, visual or not, on demand is really quite extraordinary. Soon enough, these tools are going to be able to process information in real time. And there are beta or early versions of Gmail that have been rolled out to a couple of educators that I know that allow you, in essence, to, for lack of a better way of putting it, process your email or do searches in new or more nuanced ways. It's really an extraordinary possibility what may happen here in regards to that. Also, I use ChatGPT itself on a regular basis to check through my emails to make sure it has the right tone, or to rewrite it to make it more positive, or to rewrite it to make it more simplistic, or to take out the jargon from my email. And that's just one of the ways I think we'll be able to process information. In an era where we talk about data-driven decision making in K-12 education, we're swimming in data, and I feel like most tools that are available to us to help make sense of that data are not very good, and certainly not very user-friendly. Imagine for a moment if you can take large data sets like your district's MAP scores and start to ask it questions so it can analyze and take a look at trends inside of data, and I think it's absolutely extraordinary. And then, of course, assessment, where I think both it could be a great formative assessment tool, but also give you the superpowers to highlight places where maybe what you're missing, or to give you a very foundational way of taking a look at an essay without having to have without having to look in detail or look at every single draft. I note Kevin's note in the chat. The Grammarly was an early version of this concept. It absolutely is, and in fact, I think Grammarly might be using one of these large language learning models to back newer versions, because I pay for Grammarly. I like it so much, and it's gotten a lot better even in the last 6 months. And I think that these software tools, I think, are coming to a browser near you. And I already did the live demonstration. And then I also want to tell you a little bit about my thoughts in regards to students in on this. It's really the same for students, that I think students will at some point need to find a way to be able to create and utilize these complex tools without using them to, and cheating is not the right word, it's deny themselves the educational opportunity to engage with content to learn. Everything we know about learning science says that things like memory is the result of interacting with information. And the way you interact with information is reading it, discussing, writing about it, debating about it, creating projects about it, creating visuals about it. And if we throw everything into a generative AI model, yes, it creates a product that maybe is something useful or you can be proud of, but it really does test then what the purposes of learning are. And while I think that we'll need to find a way to find a middle ground here, my initial ideas are really about using generative AI not as a tool to skip steps, but to add richness to each step, right? I think about it in terms of the writing process. The ability for a generative AI model to give you feedback on something very narrow, like show me how I'm using punctuation, or am I evaluate my dialogue in a piece of fiction writing, or help me find a way to phrase this that is less wordy, I think could create an opportunity for students to use AI Assist to become really next level learners and processors of information. We still have a long ways to go from the standpoint for example, what do we do with AI related sources? Right, MLA has an early article out on citing AI in an MLA style citation. That's part of the conversation, but it's probably not just that, right? Because saying you use the tool and how you use the tool may be a lot different, and probably would prefer the latter, right? It's not just that you used it, but tell me how you used it so you can better understand what the learning process looks like. Not to mention, there's extraordinary amounts of hand wringing from creatives about these tools. I would also note that right now, based on current written way that we do copyright law and code in the United States, you can't copyright an AI generated work, because copyrightable work has to be human generated based on very long standing concepts of copyright. And in the end, we may need to start thinking about, how do we make assignments? How do we assess? How do we do things differently in light of the fact that there will be 100% AI generated work, there will be 100% human related or generated work, and somewhere this extraordinarily muddy middle that we need to start thinking about and clarifying for students. Of course, we don't want our students, using a chatbot to write an essay as opposed to writing an essay themselves. But if they could get an outline to start with, or a chatbot could provide writing instruction to help a student become more confident, or to learn in the process as part of the formative assessment, we could really superpower learning environments in a really interesting and nuanced way. And the last thing I would say before we go back to a couple of thoughts here, and then I get a couple feedback from you. I don't think teachers will be replaced by AI. And in fact, I've given a couple of both conference presentations and also talks about this. The bottom line is that we need to remember that students still value human relationships overall. I know that in context of my day job. One of the things that we know from our 13 years of delivering online classes is that if kids want to learn something on their own, they would learn it on their own. But for things they're not desperate to learn about or have an independent motivator for, the bottom line is that they really seek and crave human relationships with teachers, with fellow students, with experts in the field. If we remember that and put that at the center of everything we do, I think that we have a much better chance of embracing AI in a good and meaningful way. Okay. Couple of April 2023 updates and caveats, and then there's a great question in chat that I want to talk about. First and foremost, one thing to know is this is moving very quickly. I gave a version of this presentation 4 weeks ago in Tacoma, Washington, and I had to update about 60% of it because tools and viewpoints have changed so much in this. And while I think we need to be talking right now about what fall 2023 looks like, understand that the chances are that whatever we're planning around now will look a little different, certainly next month, but absolutely in 6, 12, 18, and 24 months from now. The second thing to know is that generative AI is not a search engine, and we shouldn't treat it that way, right? There are a lot of people that say I save so much time because I just talk to ChatGPT to have it explain things to me. That works in a lot of context, but almost everyone that's an expert that's used ChatGPT knows that it has a propensity to just make it up if it doesn't know the right answer. And the nicest way to put that is what a lot of the AI experts say. It says it hallucinates answers, but I would say it lies. It very in a very cocky way tells you this is the answer without one shred of doubt. And we shouldn't use these tools as a search engine by any stretch of the imagination. Also, privacy, security, and safety are lagging for absolute sure. I would never put a piece of personal data into any of these models, whether you're talking about Google's or Microsoft's or ChatGPT or when Amazon comes out with a model, because you don't know where that information is going. And also, we have much stronger student data privacy laws than we did even 3 years ago. And we need to be cognizant about what those laws say and what direction they're going into. And right now, the terms of services are not very good and don't tell you very much information about that. And if anything, this is what should be guiding our next conversations, along with the broader questions about why and how. And I will also tell you that there are so many people looking to make money right now. I wouldn't trust most vendors that are telling you they have a solution that's going to change the world. They maybe do, but a lot of hucksters in the space right now that are, I think, not very productive in the way they go about things. And so, buyer beware, especially if someone's trying to sell you a comprehensive X, Y, and Z related to AI. Okay. So I would like to send you back to the Jamboard. Again, mtda.link/AI Jamboard. And there are 2 slides that I would like you to take a look at. And just for a bit of brainstorming, I'm going to answer the question in chat and then also any other question that appears there. Again, if you haven't used Jamboard before, it's got a great sticky note functionality. The 2 questions that I'd like you to think about and maybe share with others: in what ways do you envision using generative AI as a teacher, principal, or other professional? And then also, in what ways you envision using AI with students? And the way you get a sticky note is just click on the sticky note, type some information, and we'll pop a sticky note right on there. It's really quite actually a cool little piece. So feel free to do that. And while that's happening, a question from Jennifer in chat: what's the best way to check if student work was written by, sorry, students written an AI generated essay? Well, Jennifer, I have bad news for you. Almost all the research says that it is difficult to find a stable tool that will be able to generate a firm answer for you 100% or 0. But the tool that we use right now at the Digital Academy that's pretty good is GPT-0. There's literally hundreds of these now because of teachers wanting to try to detect this, and it's been an okay a tool for those purposes. But what I will tell you, like I mentioned earlier, the danger of coming up in an arms race with our students is that a lot of this content it can be modified in a way that GPT-0 and the like doesn't pick up on the issues. But I would also note that students have found hacks around that. For example, a number of students have noticed if you put 2 spaces, if you go in and manually put a second space between sentences, it will take it from being AI generated to human generated in just a couple of clicks. I would also note that GPT-0 shows the United States Constitution as being 100% AI generated. So unless you believe in a conspiracy theory that somehow people went back in time and given an AI generated Constitution to the founders of our nation, then these tools are a little suspect. And I've seen 2 research studies to say that that, for lack of a better way of putting it, we aren't going to be able to find a tool that elegantly says AI generated or not. It's just not going to be how this process plays out. But GPT-0 is where I would estimate is your best place to go as of April in 2023. Okay, going back to the Jamboard. Well, great uses stated here. I already love it to help me write tough emails or newsletters. I use it for the same thing. Great point. Someone said they'll change the reading level of articles too. By the way, there are browser plugins that aren't very good yet, but when they're there, will allow you to essentially copy something or highlight it in an article, click a button, and it will regenerate it at a new reading level or with some sort of parameter there. Adjusting activities for the diverse skills in the classroom is great. The Copilot generating units in social studies is a great one. Generate questions based on a text is awesome to rewrite articles to fit student reading level. I couldn't agree with all of these more. They're really great uses, and again, I really do think that this gives you superpowers that really is way better than in the past. Helping create different test questions based on the same CCSS to add variation between exams and progress in difficulty. It's a wonderful point of there. I think that's a really extraordinary piece. And then just checking in, envisioning ways of using it with students. Students could check pronunciation, absolutely. And in fact, the students can check, I think, is a really, really, really important power of this. My guess is that Microsoft or Google or maybe Amazon or one of the more ed tech friendly companies will come up with ways that we can go about this process to provide a safer tool or a better tool that's more student friendly. But once they do, I see it as being the ultimate pal for a kid that's looking to learn content or process information. The most recent post here, I'd like to teach them to use it to make their own writing better. I'll check with colleagues first, though, as I teach fifth grade, and I don't want them to be getting in trouble in older grades. Yeah, that's a really important point as well. So I'm going to go back to well, one quick thing I want to note: the University of Montana Academy at the University of Montana is hosting an event this summer on July 11th through 13th. It's called Innovation Runs Through It. It's a 3-day event to focus on forward-looking education strategies. We're going to add an AI set of presentations for some members of our staff that are using the tool, but also some prominent voices that we've been working with to do this. If you're interested in this topic, I would strongly suggest that you visit us. It's a relatively inexpensive conference, although being in Missoula and Western Montana can be sometimes challenging with tourists. But please consider coming to us. And then I just wanted to share all my contact information. I'm on LinkedIn at Jason-Neiffer. You can find me on Twitter at TechSavvyTeach. And then our Wakelet today that has all these resources, April AI Wakelet or mta.link/April AI Wakelet. Thank you for being here today. I'm happy to stay here as long as you like to answer additional questions or if anyone has a comment to make. Again, we really appreciate your time today. I hope I gave you a good broad overview. This is really well. It's been my experience that it's not hard to, especially if you get a bunch of teachers, especially techie teachers in a room, to start thinking about and talking about this. It's a massive size rabbit hole, but I think if we are thoughtful about this and embrace the technology in a way that we can bring our wisdom as teachers and content experts and as learning experts into the classroom, we have an extraordinarily good chance, I think, to use these tools for the betterment of students and student learning. So I will wait here as long as we have comments. Again, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it. And stay in touch on this issue. Checking punctuation and helping assist outlining larger writing projects. I like that ChatGPT cannot embed quotes as I have taught in the classroom. Yeah, that's great. And I think that how to do a specific piece of the writing is really an extraordinary way to use this tool. And I noticed that I pronounced pronunciation before. That's what you get for reading quickly. But yeah, I couldn't agree more. That notion of help me with this piece of it, right? Here's my writing. I want to know about this. I want you to give me comments on this particular piece. I just think it's such a clever way to use that tool for learning. Again, I'll stick around here for a couple more minutes. If there's any questions, you can throw them in the YouTube chat. Thanks to Mike, our assistant director, for running the board today and being our producer in the background. You did a great job. Thanks, Mike. I see another student generated one, generate ideas for transitions, etc. Yep. I think that's a great idea. Okay, I think we're at the end of this. I'm going to go ahead and shut this down. Feel free to get a hold of me at Digital Academy if you have any additional questions or want to strike up a conversation about this. It's certainly something our staff has paid a lot of attention to. Thanks, everyone, for your time today. We appreciate it. Have a great day.